We're going to get the road on the show. As the slide says, I'm Gary, AA1UE, and we're going to talk a little bit, as the slide says, about FT8 JS8 call, a couple of other things, but just a little bit of, let's see if we can go back here. All right, so a little bit of history. You know, the great thing about ham radio is that we're constantly moving forward. And so in 1895, maybe Frandy's the only one here that could remember Spark. But I mean, one of the great characteristics about Spark, it was like a, you know, you didn't have to worry about what frequency you were on because you were on everything. And ultimately, we had the transition from Spark to CW. But surprisingly, initially, there was a little bit of resistance from the Spark people to go to CW. And one of the reasons was when CW first came out as a mode, the equipment that was required at that time would have cost $250 in 1916, which is equivalent to about $7,500 today. But World War I intervened from the advent of CW, and you know, by the early 20s, everybody was on CW. So there was a transition. Then, so all digital modes, RTTY, packet, but somewhere along the road, we were able to develop modes that were able to hear, you were able to hear them below the noise or detect them below the noise. And even for most of us, how many CW operators are there here? Just about everybody. And you can tell if you're a CW operator, you probably can decode signals at the noise level because our brain has a way of doing what? Completing characters, narrowing it. And we all know that the narrower a bandwidth we're looking at, the better the signal to noise ratio is, right? It's like a hose. You know, if you turn around and you have a certain amount of water going through a large pipe and then you narrow it into a garden hose, you're going to get higher pressure and you're going to get a better signal to noise ratio. In fact, how many people here, and probably some of the old timers, remember the words coherent CW? Only George, because George is a weak signal guy. You were probably the only person in this room. But the interesting thing about it, and coherent CW was a mode that I can't say it ever became popular, but it became known in the 70s. And because a number of things. One, very precise timing had to be done on these two for CW to be copied. Very slow timing and a bandwidth and coordinated timing between specific timing between dots and dashes. It was about 6 words a minute maybe, but the bandwidth had to be about 10 hertz, which in 1970, when most radios, you know, we were tuning them in 5 kc increments. That was a big achievement. But there's always been this kind of quest, I think, to hear signals that were almost non-discernible. And coherent CW was one of those, and it used timing, it used precise times, narrow bandwidth, and sequencing. And the reason I bring this up is because we've been building, you know, every time we move forward, we take a little bit of something else and synthesize it. So along comes Packet in '78, and how many guys were on Packet way back when? And you'll remember, right, how we had our own little internet. if you will. This was before the internet was popular. We were able to relay from one station to another. So you were able to talk to Boston from here because you hit Mount Wachusett, and then you hit another one and another one. And, you know, if you got lucky, you were able to deposit your message or whatever in a station. We had our own networks. And I bring this up because it's going to be relevant to some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So packet and PSK, we moved from just plain old frequency shift keying like you would see on RTTY to phase shift keying, a subtle difference. And starting at PSK 31, we're able to hear, because of the use of various tones, we were able to hear stuff at or below the noise level. Then finally, we have Joe Taylor, JT65, use of sound cards, and was sort of the seminal thing that FT8 is an offshoot of that. The differences is the number of tones that's used. So we moved along, and finally we're going to talk about JS8 call and how that differs. How many people use JS8 call here ever? So we've got really only Mike and Dave. So you're gonna learn a little bit more about it, things that they already know. And we'll also mention probably the newest popular mode is Vera. Vera is actually a modem, and AC or Vera HF or Vera C is the actual mode of operation. And we'll talk about the differences. But whenever we've had any kind of progress, it seems that we have ham reactions. And when Spark came along and it was replaced by, who would do that? You know, things are good enough the way they are. Why do I need to invest more and more equipment? And then you get things like pollutes the airwaves. Somebody must have said that. By the way, this is everything except the last thing was said about repeaters. Not real radio. You know, pollutes the airwaves. It's too easy. No, it's too complex because you have to add tones to it. It really sort of, and as many of you know, I was first licensed as I say a kid. I was 14 years old. And at that time, there was the transition from AM to SSB, often called silly sideband, slop bucket, Donald Duck. Who would want to do that? But again, it really comes down to better signal to noise ratios too, right? You take as much power and you put it in a narrower bandwidth, you're going to communicate better. So it always seems to me that we've had these reactions. And for one of our stated goals as a hobby in the FCC regulations is that we need to, quote unquote, advance the state of the radio art, whatever that means. And so all of these advancements sometimes were looked at askance. And we have a few, a couple of people to blame for that. These guys, that's Joe Taylor and Frank it's FT8 Taylor Frank, were the developers of WSJTX, but FT8, which was Joe, but he got together with Frank and they came up with FT8. Why the 8? F for Frank and T for Taylor, but why the 8? 8 tones. They used 8 tones to, create this new mode. And if you expanded the signal, you could actually see you see all the stuff jammed together in the spectrum, but you could actually see the 8 tones, and that's sort of an expansion of it. And it's there for a reason. We're going to go on to a few other things. So, but why, it's interesting. Why so popular? And you think of what's happened sort of to our community. A lot of people are getting older. They're sometimes, and we've got a big bill going on now, HCRA restricted. I can't put up a big antenna. I can't run much power. And so that's another thing. Band conditions have been relatively good lately, but FT8 really expanded in 2021. Anybody remember a significant event in 2021? COVID. People were at home. They had time, and it really exploded in 2021 in terms of the use. Of course, it was developed by Taylor Frank developed it in 2017. But it didn't take off immediately. I mean, right now you hear it you hear any time of the day, you'll hear FT8. It didn't take off immediately because it was originally developed not to communicate the way we're doing now. It was originally developed for 6-meter meteor scatter and quick sporadic E contacts. So they had to, with JT65, it's about a minute exchange. With FT8, they moved it to 15-second exchanges. And so it had to push the information through in a short period of time. And in order to do that, they limited the amount of information that was going through your call. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
So why were they interested in limiting the time span?
So that they could make a quicker exchange. So they can make it, because when you have sporadic E clouds, they're not always up there in a position for a long period of time. Meteor scatter, you might had the air might have been ionized for a minute, and then there's another one. So they had to figure out a way to keep things below, relatively weak signals in a short period of time. And that's why they did it. So, but you think about the noise pollution. You got LED lights, you got solar farms, you got, in my house, in that farm community, I've got a dog fence, and I've got an electric fence to keep the predators away from my livestock. And so all of this is like, I'm saying, where's all this noise coming from? Oh, we want to keep our lighting bill down, so we got LED lights. And it's sort of like the way the noise levels, we haven't noticed it. It's like, if you put a frog in cold water and then you just keep on raising the temperature. But our noise levels, even in the country, and electric street, halon lights all over the place, they're higher than they've ever been. Unless you're living, someplace out where there's no light pollution or any kind of other pollution, the noise levels are higher, and it's become a bigger challenge. We may not have noticed it as much in a short period of time because of the, band conditions have been good, but wait till we hit the bottom of the cycle, you'll really notice the noise. And as far as some of the comments about it's going to kill CW, guess what? Since 2021, the use of CW has exploded. In fact, Vibroplex reported that 2021 was their best year, a company that's been around for like 90 years. So, hams are going to communicate. But when you have a 20 to 24 dB advantage, it makes it pretty exciting for the use of QRP, and many of us are, and Dave will make a comment in a little bit, many of us are out in the field, and we're not taking 200 watt rigs or 100 watt rigs, we're taking 10 or 20 watt rigs at the most out. So you've got these advantages, and that's part of the growth, obviously. So, but the whole theory is, and I think you'd agree, to communicate is better than not to communicate. And with FT8, you get to communicate. And as far as some of the it's a computer, this and that, it's not much of a QSO. I'd like anybody to spend time listening to the bands where most QSOs are not conversations anymore, unfortunately. They're 5-9, thank you, go on to the next station. So I'm not sure how valid that argument is. but to communicate is better than not to communicate. So what do you need for probably who hasn't been on FT8 here? All right, a few people, about a third. So what do you need? You need a radio. You need an antenna. And you need to weigh whether you do it directly. A lot of the newer radios have built-in sound cards, but you either connect it directly and a piece of software from the WSJTX suite, which you can download at, I guess, SourceForge. I got some references to it. So that's all you need. Now, a lot of older radios, you'll need some kind of an interface, a signal link, a digi-rig. I also have, I've got a FT891, and I use it with the digi-rig, which is a great little tool. And so I just wanted to say, well, if I was in my house on the first floor, and I was using my magnetic loop antenna, you know, what could I get if I just turned on for 5 minutes? And this is, I'm using a Zygu 6100. You can see it's 5-watt output. I'm using my magnetic loop, 5 minutes, 40 meters, you know, and this is just being on the air just for a second and mapping that. So you're out there 800-900 miles, and I didn't even bother using the my antenna analyzer. You know, with a magnetic loop, you got to be right on. I just tuned it. Oh, what's the best noise? And so you can communicate under just about any condition. You know, 20 to 24 dB advantage is pretty, you know, how much power, if you were running 100 watts, how much power would you need to be running if you were going to have a 24 dB increase? Do the math. So what are you going to see? Was there a question?
One more. Okay, so you're going to use the digi-rig and the 891 and your mag loop antenna. What else do you need in order to do this?
A computer
And
a keyboard. You need a computer, and it goes without saying because it's a program, right? Now, and we'll go into one of the computers. Yes.
Not saying anything's wrong, but they have actually put FT8 into the Zygu 6100.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Well, you need a keyboard. You need a keyboard. The other thing, it's not the only one. I have anybody have a ZBEC? It's a Raspberry Pi based radio. Runs 20 watts. So as more and more computers are going inside of it. But, you know, for most people, a computer is needed. And many of the stuff that is out there can decode, some of the radios can decode it, but they can't transmit it. So, but by and large, a computer is useful. Let's put it that way. So, and by the way, the digi-rig is, you know, it's about $50, I think, now with a cable. The cables are more, you know, because you'll get a custom cable for your radio, or you can make it. All right, so so here's your typical screen. Now, the frequencies are already set in the software. As you probably know by now, these, you know, even though you can, in theory, transmit anywhere, if you're not in the right place at the right time, so basically so there's standard frequencies. And for 14 megahertz, it's a 14074. So you'll notice that there's sometimes different. So on one side, you're going to see, and we'll show you a waterfall in a minute. One side, you're going to see all the stations coming in. The what's the far left, what time was it being heard? And you can see it's all pretty much the same time. What was the signal strength? -6 dB, -9 dB. So all of these are relatively strong signals because it can detect up to 24, 28 dB below the noise level. And the receive frequency is there. So how do you find out where you're going to be? So basically, we're going to go through a few tips. But over on this side, it's not filled in, but there's automatic sequencing. So you'll have a CQ, or you'll have some automatic responses. So once you make a contact with the individual, it takes over. And it goes back and forth in 15-second sequences. So you hear it for 16 seconds, and then you have to respond. And your computer will respond automatically if a couple of things happen. One, you're on the right frequency, because you're in a bandwidth, each one of these signals is 50 hertz wide. So if you're going to respond, you have to be within, the person has to, and you really need to be on the right frequency. The next, and you could see that there's a difference on here, there's an offset. The receive frequency is different from the transmit. And that's all right if the other person is running the same thing. And so this is the screen you're going to see. And what you're able to do is select, this is WSJTX, you're going to be able to select the mode to do it. The next thing you'll see that you want to pay attention to is the waterfall. Because you don't want to be on top of a person. So you're going to have two sliders on your waterfall. This is your transmit, and there could be another green of what you receive. So if you're going to call CQ, you want to find the space, and you could just, your rig is controlled, and we're going to get to the next screen, by the computer, and you could slide, just like if you're going to use any kind of ham software to control, CAT software to control the frequency. So let's look at a setup. Maybe. Now let's try this. All right, so the key is, part of it is your settings. And the first thing you want to do, you got to have an input to your rig and an output to the computer, right? So you're going to select your, and this is mine for whatever reason, but the microphone, when I took the screenshot, so the cable in is a USB mic, and the cable out, it goes out to the speakers, the USB. So you set up your audio, and you want to make sure that you're not using your computer, your native computer microphone or your native computer speakers, because you're talking to the radio. And the next thing you're going to do is pick your radio. So here I'm picking you find the port with device manager. Where is your, because you got to connect to the right port. What port so you go to device manager, you find the USB port, and typically the baud rate's going to be, it depends upon the radio, it's going to be 96 or 19.2. Some radios can go faster information. And so every radio is going to have its own configuration, which there's a ton of YouTube videos. CAT means it's being transmitted automatically when you transmit, it's going to key the transmitter. Not every radio is capable of doing that, so you'd put Vox and you have a cable going into the microphone area, and it would just, the signal would be heard and it would go on. So it depends on your radio. So what platforms can you get this FT8 on? Windows, Linux, Mac, Raspberry Pi. Who has an Android phone? All right, so you're going to use like FT8CN if you want to be on Android. And maybe the last year and a half or so, there's been an iOS app available. And Dave has been using it extensively. You want to give your your comments about your experience and what you got there right now?
So we have the FT8 app, phone, and
board running box out of the radio. 5 watts. I'm just at the same door antenna, but the antenna. I use it for POTA, I use it for SOTA. It's been kind of fun getting out.
How many contacts have you made using that setup on POTA, as far as you know? 200 or 300. And you've been using the ATX? Oh, not that same antenna, but you've had good luck with that?
Been out there sometimes doing a POTA activation, I call using CW, nothing. Bands are bad, I go on to the app and I can make 10 or 15 contacts, whatever I need. It's very simple.
And so when you bring your stuff out to the field, you don't want to get skunked, right? To communicate is better than not to communicate.
The G90 with the earring.
You're running.
That's nice. I mean, you've got a small screen deal and it's not optimal. It bailed me out a few times, more than once.
You know, there you go. Right. If CW isn't working or sideband isn't working, and the only difference between that and an Android, you need a splitter cable. So it's a great approach. But one of the criticisms, I guess, well, you can't have a conversation. And that is true. You can communicate. So what happened? Well, the evolution continues, just like we went from Spark to CW, from AM to sideband to digital modes. And welcome like JS8. So in 2018, only 1 year after FT8 came out, Jason Scherer, who has been a ham only about 8 years at the time, 7, 8 years, but was a programmer, said, hey, is there some way we can look at this protocol and what can we do with it? And he started to be involved with the FT8 groups, and he had some ideas to make more conversation. And he asked Joe Taylor, can we integrate these ideas that I'm about to tell you into WSJTX, which is his Joe Taylor's and software. And Joe said, no, but do not let me stop you from taking this as far as it can go. And so Jordan, who was a programmer and manager for Zapier, the computer company, said, all right, let's do it. And he credits Joe and all of the other folks that were involved, because even, there's been many multi-kind of tone apps that even Joe Taylor built on. So we said, JS8 stands on the shoulders of giants. The takeoff angle is better up there. So here's what he came up with. JS8 call, it used to be called FT8 call, but his initials, relatively young guy, programmer. And so you can, and I'll give you at the end, there's this where you can get it, but if you just Google JS8 call, you'll come to Jordan's website. So how is it different? Well, number one, you can have a conversation, integrated chat, back and forth, no limitations on your conversation. And so how does he do that? By linking these segments together of formerly FT8. The other thing, for all of you guys that remember Packet or are doing emergency services, you could either have direct messaging or store and forward. So we could turn around, I can't communicate to that station right now. Conditions aren't right, but I can communicate to another station. When conditions get better, that could be forwarded directly to an individual's mailbox. another thing, so it's got multi-hop. So even, so you're able to see on when you're looking at their software, you could see, all right, who can hear me? And that gets listed. And then you could query another guy, who can you hear? So maybe I want to communicate to someone that I can't hear. I can relay, just like old time packet radio. I can relay through there. And so but what if I don't want to just talk or broadcast, if you will, to one individual? Well, we can do an all call, which means anybody who's listening, but maybe you got an MCOM group or an ARES group or some kind of custom group of your own. You're able to just, again, message and communicate directly to that group of people if they're listening. The other thing is, so when you go on, you send out what's called we call a heartbeat, which basically is a beacon. And it's pretty much saying, I'm here, who can hear me? But the other benefit of this, we're all talking about Meshtastic now, right? Why is the word mesh in there? And what's a characteristic of a mesh? So you could have mesh networking with dynamic routing. So what does that mean? If one, I want to talk to one individual, or I want to communicate or send a message, but I can't because part of that network is down, then it'll automatically find a way to get your message across. But most people, having said that, today use it for the first thing, a conversation. So how does that differ from FT8 type of conversation? Well, first of all, there's multiple speeds that are available to you, and the software can decode this automatically. For instance, let's say you have very poor band conditions. You could go to the slow speed, which is about 8 words per minute. It's torturous, right? And by the way, you could type ahead. So if you keep on typing, it might take 3 minutes for your signal to get through. So you're going to want to keep that short. But the normal mode is about 15 words per minute. But let's say you're a pretty good typist and conditions are pretty good. And so basically, if you're willing to go down to like minus 8 dB, 18 dB, you could, I can't type faster than 40 words per minute. I'm not a good typist. But having said that, and so you could type in you could type in, but remember, all of these things are going to be linked together in about 15-second segments. So if I'm typing at 40 words per minute, and I have an 80-word brag tape or something about my, then it's going to take 2 minutes for that to transmit, which it's a full cycle of duty mode. So, you got to pay attention to the heat that's being generated, and you don't want to be running. You don't want to be running at full power because you're probably going to hurt your finals. But any event, people could be transmitting at different speeds that simultaneously decodes any of the speeds that they've elected to go through. So pretty interesting stuff. Yes. There's a good point. There's not nearly as much activity on JS8 call, which is on 14, it's 14078 as opposed to, but there are events, like there's weekend events and there's monthly events. So again, it's like, where do people, and it's been around since 2018, but it's more and more people, I will say, get bored with the fact that FT8 is just, a brief exchange and they want to have a conversation. Then there's more and more people. But again, it's like other digital modes like digital voice. There's weekend events, there's monthly events, there's nets, and you just have to look if you want to get on there. Yeah.
Yes.
It is just, yeah, just text-based, just typing. No audio.
The audio mic, if, you know, that is talking to it, where it puts the message in and then sends it.
Well, I suppose for anybody who had some issue, today you could do text to speech, but then you have to weigh, like for instance, so you'd have to cut and paste and put it in some fashion. Well, yeah, you got a screen, but it might be interesting, or maybe you could do it directly. I haven't tried it, but if you had text to speech, you probably could just put it right in there.
You can just, after you talk into it, you just push, send it.
Yeah. Well, it really depends upon the interface you're using. I haven't tried it. It's a great question. Why? Yeah. I mean, it's as long as you have some way of, but you're going to give me an idea. I'm going to try that.
Yeah.
See, that's why we have these meetings, because it comes up, gee, I never thought of that. It's funny, but all the time I'll use a recorder, and then I'll load it up and have my audio converted into speech and a summary. So great idea. But to your point, Dave, there's not nearly as much activity on there. But look what's happened to, we used to be, a lot of us, how many people were on PSK 31? Right? There was a pretty active group in what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years. You can't find anybody on PSK 31. So you look for the alternative that you can, but I had probably an hour conversation with a guy in France on JS8 call. It was just, back and forth. So but if you don't go there, you're not going to see them. Now, one of the things, and I may have bet on one of the slides, that these two modes are not compatible. So that FT8 can't decode JS8 call, and JS8 call can't decode FT8. And there's a number of reasons for that. Oh, by the way, I'm here. All right, my heartbeat, which is a beacon. All right. So here's what the screen looks like. So the stations that you are hearing would be going on this side. This is your typing would go here, and the messages would go here, and everybody that's hearing you would go on that side. And I just did a screen grab of it. But part of it is it's very similar. If you've used FT8, the interface is very similar. So just a couple of differences on it. One that makes it unique. Number one, the coding that Jason used to do this, so that you could be efficient, he took the most commonly used characters, and they take up less space, where odd characters take up long space. So it makes it efficient. So normally on CW, we might say, we'd use abbreviations, but those abbreviations they're not necessarily with the most common characters. So sometimes you're used to saying, for instance, let's say at the end we're saying CUAGN, not common characters. It's actually quicker to say see you again than it is, because E is a common character, O is a common character, and type it out, and it will go quicker than if you were going to use abbreviations. So abbreviations don't help, but he has a larger alphabet and more flexibility on the way it's coded. So unlike FT8, it's not available on, at least yet, on iOS or Android. and basically Windows, Linux, Mac, and Raspberry Pi. So what's the next step, or what is going on next-wise? Well, I think probably there may only be 2 people in this room that have used Vera. Mike, Smitty, anybody else? So Vera is a relatively new mode, 2021, and actually Vera isn't the mode. Vera is, if you will, the modem. And so that was developed by, Vera was by Alberto Naito Ross, and the programs and the use for HF and other purposes were developed by 4Z1AC. So Vera uses something called, and say this 10 times fast, octagonal frequency division multiplexing. And what is it, and how does that differ from where you see like FT8 or JS8 call? Well, Vera uses 52 tones in various bandwidths, but always 52 tones, and they can't be simultaneous. So this graphic shows only 8 tones. And you'll notice that none of the peaks or the valleys overlap. There's always a space in between. Well, can you imagine, 52 not overlapping? And they're able to, unlike being in the most narrow bandwidth, they're able to, and that's just a Vera chat screen, very similar to FT8, but the speeds are a little bit different as well. So let's see, that's what your program would look like and what the signal to noise ratio is. But here's the thing in terms of, it's far more robust in many ways than any of the other modes. You've got, real-time typing. When the other person's typing, it's like, when you're doing text messaging, you could see the other person typing. You could see who's typing. You could do file transfers. You can do email, it has email, again, for call and forward, but the speed automatically changes. It'll be automatically either speed up or slow down the amount of information based upon band conditions. It's sort of an amazing, it's a free program, mostly. I say, because when you start to get up to the high speeds that are on VHF, UHF, if you want the maximum speeds, you got to pay for it. The program was developed, Vera was commercially, it was developed for commercial use as well. So, but the licensing of it, you don't really need to license it unless you're really doing some high speed stuff. And so here's what it can do. And of course, like everything, the bandwidth changes in the higher speed that you go. So at 1500 BPS, it's a 500 hertz signal. And for HF, the most you're going to get is basically 7500, 7050. You remember all the old modems? But for UHF, you could push through 250 and 250, so interesting mode. It's starting to become more and more used, mostly for NCOM, but it has, and again, find somebody that's using it. Again, there's weekends, there's systems on it. So it's really sort of the latest thing going on. Here's but part of the drawbacks, only one program. If you're a Mac person or you don't have a Windows computer, and it has to be a relatively decent one, you're not going to be using an old one. So that's pretty much it. So sometimes things don't work the way they should, right? So here's just a few things. On all of these digital modes, don't use your AGC. The program takes care of that for you. Don't use your ALC. The program takes care of that for you, and it could cause distortion. Keep your audio levels, 50%, 60% at the most. Keep your power output low, because longer duty cycle, you're going to be basically heating up your finals. And just a couple of last tips here. Let's see. Like they train us, right? Use the minimum amount necessary of power for communications. Not a lot of people running a kilowatt on Vara, I think. Not needed. Keep the, and again, I should have probably mentioned this earlier. In order for all of these programs to work, you need to have your PC time clock in sync with the other station. And so if you're not using net time or one of the net-based programs to adjust your clock, because if you're off by a second and a half, it's not going to work. And obviously always use upper sideband and keep your filters open wide so you're picking them up. So those are the most things. Resources, FT8, if you haven't been there yet, SourceForge, JS8 call on GitHub, and again, I don't think I put the Vara resources on here. So that's pretty much a quick overview. I just hope maybe you came out with maybe one idea that you didn't have before the presentation. Any other thoughts or things I can expand on? Or maybe if I don't have the answer, I'm sure somebody else in this room would. George?
About what the Vara modem is, you said that part of it. Software modem?
Yes, it's a software modem. It was, I think it was developed by the same guy that developed Clover. I may not be, which is, but basically, and it uses a sound card. And it's sort of amazing to me how, all of us that have of a certain age remember using dedicated TNCs, we used to, right, or multi-terminal node. Oh, and we're going to upgrade to Amtor and some of these other better modes. And now, these geniuses that are programmers are able to use a sound card to take care of some of these things. So it's a software modem. Any other thoughts? Well, anyway, thanks for your attention. I appreciate it. I hope there was some value you got out of it. But any event, hope to hear you on JS8 call pretty soon. All right, great. Thank you.